Welcome back to Pick It. Yesterday was an eventful day, with our player picks resulting in a mixed bag of wins and losses. Mitchell showed promise with 3 successful three-pointers, although he also had a fair share of missed attempts. Unfortunately, he suffered an injury in the third quarter. Claxton also had a good performance at one point, but his playing time was limited. If these two players had more time on the court, we could have had a better outcome. Now, let's dive into today's action. First up, we have the Suns and Bucks game. When we look at the average points scored by both teams in their games, it comes out to be 237 points per game. The statistics slightly lean towards this game going over that total, with a 66% success rate in this season's games. As for the spread, based on previous matchups, the Suns emerged victorious with a score of 114-106. This could be a factor to consider when looking at an alternate line for the Suns. The Suns' team total is also worth noting, as they average 116 points per game. They tend to surpass today's line more often when considering the season and head-to-head cover rates. This makes it worth considering alternate lines for the Suns. Similarly, for the Bucks' team total, we would prefer a different line, as the one provided seems fairly even. The Bucks rank 4th in points per game, averaging 120 points. However, when facing the Suns, they tend to fall short of this line. Moving on to the Heat and Pistons game, the combined average points scored by these teams is 222 points per game. This line is quite tricky, as it has a 70% success rate for both going over and staying under in this season's games and head-to-head matchups. Therefore, it's not a line that piques my interest. The spread also presents a similar challenge, with the stats looking too even to make a call. Although the Heat won their last matchup 108-95, their cover rate dropped significantly when considering the season and recent form. If anything, I would lean towards strengthening the line on the Pistons side. Looking at the Heat's team total, the stats suggest that it's better to stay under. They have stayed under in all of their last 5 games, and their cover rate for the season and matchups also leans towards the under. They average 110 points per game, which aligns with the provided line. On the other hand, the Pistons' team total looks more promising for them to go over. They have succeeded in doing so in 80% of the season's games in recent form. However, in matchups against the Heat, they struggle to surpass this line, achieving it only 40% of the time. They average 112 points per game, ranking 22nd in the league. Our first player pick is Cade Cunningham, to have over 7.5 assists. His cover rates are looking solid, as you can see. He has also hit in 5 of his last 6 games, 4 in his last 4 against Miami, and 5 of his last 6 away games. We also went with Jaden Ivey to have over 2.5 turnovers. He has managed this in 4 of his last 5 games, also 4 in his last 5 home games, and 4 in his last 5 games against Miami. We also took Ivey to have under 16.6 points. He has hit this in 11 of his last 14 games, 5 in his last 6 against the Heat, while Miami is ranked 4th in points against. Now let's turn our attention to the Nuggets and Mavericks match. These teams have a combined average of 234 points per game. The stats slightly favor the total points staying under this line, but it's a close call. Considering an alternative line could strengthen the statistics. The spread is another situation where I would suggest exploring alternative lines to have more flexibility in choosing either side. Checking the lines and cover rates for both teams will help determine the strongest bet for this game. The Nuggets team total is also a close one, as they average 114.8 points per game. The stats slightly favor them staying under this line, but since it's right at the limit, I would recommend looking for an alternative line for them to stay under. As for the Mavericks team total, they average 119 points per game, making them strong contenders for going over. This holds true for both recent form and the season. However, when facing the Nuggets, they struggle to surpass this line, achieving it only 33% of the time. Our player pick is Aaron Gordon to have over 13.5 points, hitting in 11 of his last 15 games, 3 of his last 4 away games, and 100% of the time in his last 5 games against Dallas. Let's now shift our focus to the Boston and Wizards match. These teams have an average of 235 points per game when combined. It's a close call, with almost even stats for this season and head-to-head matchups. However, in recent form, they have stayed under this line 80% of the time. The spread is also quite even, with Boston winning their last game against the Wizards by a margin of 4 points. This is why we are favoring the Wizards, along with the fact that they have matched or outperformed Boston in all categories when looking at the stats. Boston's team total is set at a high line, although they did well in their last game against the Wizards. They only average 121 points per game, so the line seems appropriate. If anything, I would consider strengthening their underline. If the odds are not worth the risk, it might be best to pass on this one. On the other hand, the Wizards team total presents another close call. They average 114 points per game, and the stats show that they have a slightly better tendency to go over in head-to-head matchups and this season's games. Moving on to the Raptors and Magic game, these teams have an average of 224 points per game when combined. In their last game, they hit this line spot on. The stats heavily favor this game going over, but personally I still lean towards them staying under. Exploring alternative markets for both outcomes might be a good idea to find a better fit. As for the spread, the stats clearly suggest going with the Raptors. They have a 76% cover rate in this season's games, a perfect record in their last 5 games, and a 78% success rate in head-to-head matchups. It's worth noting that in their last game the Raptors lost by 10 points, so this will be a close call. I would still look to strengthen this line, but with a preference for the Raptors. The Raptors team total is looking good to go over. They average 113 points per game, and the stats overwhelmingly support this trend. With an 84% success rate for the season, a perfect record in recent form, and a 78% success rate in matchups, this seems like a solid choice. On the other hand, the Magic's team total leans towards staying under. They have stayed under in 90% of games against the Raptors, 80% in recent games, and 64% of this season's games. They average 110 points per game, so again, looking to strengthen this line would be advisable. Our pick for this one is Wendell Carter Jr. to have over 1.5 assists. He has managed it in 4 of his last 4 games, 4 of his last 5 home games, and it helps knowing the Raptors are ranked 28th in assists against. We also took Gary Harris to have over 1.5 made threes, hitting in 9 of his last 11 games, 5 in 6 home games, and 4 in 4 when facing the Raptors. Now let's turn our attention to the Nets and Spurs game. These teams average a combined 224 points per game. The stats slightly favor them going over this line, with a success rate of over 60% in all categories. When it comes to the spread, it's a close one, but the Nets appear to be the stronger team to cover. They have an 80% cover rate in head-to-head matchups and dominate the cover rate against the Spurs. It's worth noting that in their last game the Nets dominated, winning with a score of 123-103. We also prefer the Nets to hit over their team total. Although they only average 111 points per game their last match and the majority of the stats support them going over. This is the direction we would lean. Despite their struggle in the last game, we also favor the Spurs to hit over their line. The stats once again push us in this direction, especially considering that they managed to do so in 71% of games against the Nets. They average 112 points per game, just above the provided line. Lastly, let's take a look at the Hawks and Clippers match. These teams have a combined average of 236 points per game. When comparing the stats, I personally prefer the under, although they exceeded this line easily in their last game against each other. For the spread, I would suggest strengthening an already strong Hawks line. They have an almost 80% cover rate in all categories, and in their last game, the Clippers only won by a margin of 5 points. Looking at the Hawks team total, they prefer to hit over this line over 80% of the time in both this season and games against the Clippers. They average 119 points per game, ranking 5th in the league. On the other hand, the Clippers team total leans towards staying under. They average 116 points per game, and have stayed under in 4 of their last 5 games. In games against the Hawks, they have a 60% success rate in staying under. Once again, considering alternative lines would be wise. Our last pick is Dejounte Murray to have over 4.5 rebounds, hitting in 13 of his last 17 games, all 8 of his last away games, and 6 in 6 against the Clippers. That wraps up our analysis of today's games. Remember to consider the stats, recent form, and head-to-head matchups, plus any additional information when making your betting decisions. Please like and subscribe. Good luck.